Welcome to this week's episode of the Liberty Unveiled podcast, formerly the Teshua Unveiled podcast. I am your host, Brad Hopp, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Pastor Sam Jones. Together, we are unveiling liberty one episode at a time. We'll be discussing the latest in trafficking news, insider stories from those being delivered, and studying the Founders Bible to learn how to return America to sanity and true freedom. Our sponsor for today's show is Teshua Tea Company. Visit teshuatea.com or deliverancetea.com. Hi, and welcome to the Liberty Unveiled podcast. I'm your host, Brad Hopp, and I'm here with Pastor Sam Jones today. And actually, we're in a completely new setup because I am on my way home from Greensboro, North Carolina, and Nesquehoning, Pennsylvania.
You're kind of on your way home.
Yeah, kind of, sort of, in a fire truck. And so I was coming through the eastern side of Iowa, so I stopped over his place today. So we're actually filming over here today. So that we can get a couple podcasts done, and we're just going to pick up where we left off last week in the Founders Bible. But for those of you that are just joining us, real briefly, I'm going to not bore all my normal listeners with this, but my business partner, Andrew, is a missionary in communist Asia, and he and the team rescue underage girls from the horrors of sex trafficking. And so we started a company together called Teshua Tea Company, and the Liberty Unveiled podcast is the podcasting arm of Teshua Tea Company. And so with Liberty Unveiled, we discuss, the Founders Bible, we're discussing sex trafficking, we're discussing these kind of different things, and how that source of the freedom that the girls that my partner rescues is the same source of freedom that really helped found America and put America into a position where she became a world superpower for numerous years. But anyway, so Andrew and the team rescue these girls out of sex trafficking. They get the girls into our rescue and rehab facility where they learn to read and write and do their math, and they learn to run businesses. They learn to run a tea shop. They learn to harvest and process and make teas and coffees and bracelets and coasters and some cool, exciting news that I just got this week is we are actually able to start shipping again. So we're going to be able to have some teas. The green tea will be coming back in. We've been sold out of that for a while, and the pour coffees are going to be able to come back in now too. So
okay,
that'll be really exciting because we'll be able to roast those fresh on demand and stuff and get those out. So joining our Thai coffee lineup. So for those of you that don't know, the Thai coffee lineup actually comes from a missionary friend of ours down in Thailand, who he and his team work with villages that whenever the news media wanted pictures of poor people, that was the village that they went to because the people were so broke. Literally, their per capita income was $200 a year.
Wow.
And
can you imagine that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just amazing. And so subsistence agriculture was their big thing. But anyway, Charlie and his team have gone in and started working with them and got them to grow coffee and stuff. And they're actually growing a world-class coffee. And Thai coffee is extremely hard to come by. It's very rare. In fact, I would say it's even more rare, or every bit as rare as Kona coffee.
Really?
Yeah, which Kona coffee...
that's kind of like the big one from Hawaii, right?
Yeah, it is. Kona coffee, everybody always goes, oh, I got Kona... No, you didn't. If you paid anywhere under $15 a pound for Thai or for Kona coffee, you did not have real Kona coffee. You had a blend. And it probably had like 10% Kona in it, because True Kona, the green beans from True Kona are like bottom end $20 a pound green. That's before roasted.
They make coffee out of green beans?
Yeah. Just like ice cream is it's got sugar cane in it, so it's that's a vegetable. It's got vanilla beans, so that's a vegetable. It's got dairy in it. Chocolate comes from cocoa beans, so that's a vegetable.
I probably shouldn't mention this on this podcast, being that it's for rescuing those who are in sex slavery. But Bill Cosby used to do this comedic routine about chocolate cake.
One of the all-time best routines.
It's got eggs, flour.
That's, yep. I think that might have been where I stole the joke about ice cream having, cane sugar. And
well, it's just a hilarious routine, but and that's not to endorse Bill Cosby by any means.
Not.
But
no,
but he is funny. I mean, that's the
Yeah, you can be funny and be a reprobate at the same time.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I definitely wouldn't drink something he offered me. So.
Yeah. But anyway, so going along with what we were talking about here, I wanted to kind of catch people up on some of the news just real briefly here. And I'm not going to read all these articles, but this is just, I get Google alerts for different news that's going around the country about sex trafficking and stuff and human trafficking. In January, a Miami man was accused of sex trafficking teens during the Miami Super Bowl. He was arrested actually just recently, I guess. Mikhail Smith, son of Levy Smith, was accused of sex trafficking and money laundering. A Harrisburg man was sentenced to 25 years in prison for leading a human trafficking operation. A Reading woman, 27 years old, 27, was pled guilty to child sex trafficking and pornography charges. 27. Man. And I think on the last episode we were talking about.
I mean, I'm 28. That's
Yeah, but we were talking about two girls that were like 19 and 21 that were busted for trafficking.
It's insane.
It's
hasn't there been recently quite a few rescues? Some pretty large rescues.
Yes, there has been some really large rescues, and I'm sorry, my brain is tired enough after 1,200, 1,300 miles, whatever I've already put on. Since Wednesday.
I can't even count that high, just saying.
I will have I'll have 3,400 miles by the time I'm done with this trip, because I'm going all the way to California. But I'm trying to remember what they were saying was leading to a lot of these arrests.
Well, and I'm careful with this word on the conspiracy theory, because I don't want to say that it is a conspiracy theory. But Jeffrey Epstein's girlfriend.
His girlfriend. You're right. That was what it was that I saw. Yeah.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't know if it's a conspiracy or not. It sure seems coincidental that that as soon as she gets arrested, all these things started getting busted. When we do know that Jeffrey Epstein was involved in sex trafficking and had an entire island, probably much worse things than that. The rumors are much worse than just simply sex trafficking. We won't get into all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, no matter whatever the reason is that these children are getting rescued, we praise the Lord for that.
Right, exactly. And the biggest thing in this is where what I really appreciate about it, what Andrew does, and we've talked about this on previous episodes too, is a lot of these groups that are doing the rescues, and I'll never bash on them for doing the rescues because we need to, but the thing that we need to see happen, and what we're trying to do through some of the connections that we're piecing together and things are starting to come into play, is I want to see, we really have a need for an improvement in our aftercare type programs here in the States.
Yes, well,
that's a
everywhere.
big issue.
Everywhere except for Andrew it seems like. I mean, and there might be some other good places out there. I'm not saying that he's the only one, but the only one I've heard of. Because you mentioned this.
Right.
This is the coolest thing I think about this ministry. Is obviously it gives people the gospel. Okay, that's honestly the coolest thing. You want to see people's souls saved. But then it equips them for how to live after this, because I imagine that those who get sex trafficked, and of course, I can only imagine the distress that these children have. I mean, was it 12 or 13 is the youngest?
The youngest is 11.
11.
Yeah.
11. Can you imagine what an 11-year-old who, the way that this has been explained by you and Andrew is that they get them, they put them in a brothel, get them drunker than a skunk, make them drink at a super young age, like we're looking at that. Of course, horrific things happen to them as they are just incredibly abused, all these kind of things. Can you imagine how confused and little self-value and little self-worth these people have? But then they also, at 11-year-old, I mean, they've lived a completely different life. They have no normal skills, no sense of normal life. Well, Teshua comes in here. delivers them not only from sex slavery, gives them the gospel to deliver them from sin, which is the ultimate deliverance, but then it delivers them by teaching them biblical principles on how to work, gives them a biblical education, goes and counsels them with, and when we talk psychological counseling, we're not talking about, well, what's your truth, honey? It's not that kind of a thing. It's real, absolutely just an incredible thing. But then it also equips them with skills and education so that they can go and catch up and they can actually live a victorious, I don't want to say normal life, because first of all, what's a normal life? I don't know what a normal life is, but they can live a victorious life, overcoming all of these obstacles in their life, make them financially independent, because what happens if you've got all this baggage, you're rescued, even if they go and they just kind of put you through school, but nobody really invests in you, which is what would happen in America. Well, you get sent out in the world 18, maybe 21, boom, they give you the boot. What are you going to end up doing? Probably going into, if you're in the United States especially, into pornography, into sex work, move to Las Vegas, become a prostitute, because it's what you know.
Right.
And nobody's ever dealt with those issues. But here, with Teshua, it goes in it's really that deliverance. It's true deliverance on all spectrums, which is an incredible thing.
Yeah. And we're actually really close to being able to get the rescue house. So I think, in fact, that might even be in the works. I haven't gotten to talk to Andrew lately. I know that we had a donation here a couple of weeks ago, plus two Asian brothers, an Asian pastor in his church, and then an Asian businessman brother, both donated like $2,500. Plus, we have a pastor friend of ours that I actually sit on his board that he donated $2,500 to getting the rescue and rehab facility, or a second one. But it's expensive every month to run the rescue facility, and that's one of the things that we've talked about in previous episodes too. Is that I was reading an article a year and a half, 2 years ago, and it was written by a girl that had been trafficked, or she had helped rescue a person that was trafficked, and got the girl into, tried to get her into halfway houses and tried to get her the help that she needed and stuff, and the aftercare was so lacking that the girl that had been trafficked was just like, after a year, she's like, I'm going back to my pimp, because at least then I had a roof over my head. And so, we really need to, that's one of the things that as we grow this, that's one of the things that I want to see, is be able to do more work stateside too, so we can actually replicate what Andrew and the team have been able to do over there, do it over here, and expand this even further, so we can really start making a dent.
Yeah, well, and I mean, as somebody who, I'm a foster care parent. We've adopted from foster care. The system isn't as bad as what some people would like to say. I've had people rail on me saying Christians should have nothing to do with foster care because it's terrible and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
And I've definitely gone rounds with foster care stuff with DHS, especially recently.
Right here in Iowa.
Yeah. But the system is broke. It's not. I wouldn't say it's the worst system. But it is. I would say the system's broke. I think that's fair to say. It has some downfalls. It is lacking, and the real reason why it's broke, and it's always going to be broke in this kind of a thing, is because we're talking ultimately about family government. And what is it? Foster care doing? It's putting civil government invading family government. And we're also talking church government. The families, really churches through the families, because what is a church? It's a family of families, ought to go and to take care of the orphans. That's really how it should work.
Right.
And so when the civil government comes in and does things, I've tried to pour gas into my lawnmower here recently, and every time I do that, I am reminded how the government doesn't fix gas cans very well, and they don't have an ability at all to fix problems.
Right.
When they go outside of their jurisdiction. And so, yeah, it is broken. And so, I mean, I think that'd be awesome if we could eventually get something going in the United States. I think the system is wonderful. It'd be interesting to see what would happen in the United States, because it'll probably get regulated to death. But the nice thing is that when you attach it to a church, especially a strong church, I don't know. I know one pretty strong church out in Sioux City that might be able to attach it to. That that can fight the civil government and kind of put them back in their place. That's something that's pretty good. But
yeah, you know, and this is an issue really that parents need to be aware of, because it's an issue that can hit your own home. You know, and I don't think we've talked about this yet, but we had an issue recently where a and I won't say who, I won't say how, I won't say he's underage, but he's a young man that we know that is much older than my daughter, my youngest, or not my youngest daughter, but my middle daughter, and wrote her 2 letters, one that got lost and got found by some other people and was given to me, that with questions in there that were almost pornographic in nature to my 11-year-old. And so this is an issue that all of us can face and all of us can deal with. And so when people say, well, why should I care about sex trafficking? Because it can happen in your own family. I do this on a daily basis. I live this, and yet it happened. You know, my 11-year-old got letters that some of the questions in the letters and some of the statements in the letters were statements that I would hear a trafficker say at the initial outset. Now, this young man is, you know, he's at a point where he can get help, and we've confronted the issue. We've talked to his parents. We've talked to the authorities that need to be notified and stuff. So he's at a point where he can get help and stuff. But if it's not dealt with, he's also at a point where it could go very wrong very quickly and very poorly. Right. If it's not dealt with. And so when, you know, there's 2 aspects here. Yes, I have some mercy for him from the standpoint of, I want to see him get the help that he needs, but my mercy only goes so far. And if you don't get the help that you need and you're not willing to work through it, then you become public enemy number 1 in my mind. And so there is a grace extended to the point that you're willing to get help.
Well, and I think that this is important because you know, as a pastor, you get put in some interesting situations. I mean, I can't go into a lot of details because of confidentiality kind of stuff, but I mean, I've done some pretty interesting counseling before, and I use that word interesting perhaps in a wrong sense. I mean, interesting, yes, but some pretty despicable counseling. I mean, I've had a man come to me who's in prison today, and praise the Lord, the man accepted Christ as a Savior after this, repented, and the last of my knowledge is leading Bible studies in prison. But he came to me, and I had no idea what the issue was. I had somebody else said, "Hey, this guy's life's falling apart. Can you talk to him?" You know, I'm a pastor, but more than that, I'm a Christian. Right. So it's like, yeah, sure, I'll talk to anybody whose life's falling apart. Well, come to find out, he had repeatedly raped one of his daughters. And I mean, very young age kind of a thing. So it's pedophilia, it's incest, it's, I mean, I don't even know. But there are 2 things that stick out in my mind. One was in one counseling session where he was adamant he wanted to bring his wife in, and this was before he repented. And I'm going, okay, this is going to be super awkward, you know. And he wanted to point out all of her flaws. And as I'm sitting here just kind of listening to this, and I mean, her flaws, I mean, they were flaws nonetheless. But in comparison, I mean, come on. And finally I looked at him and I said, hey, yeah, she might have some issues, but your issues are a whole lot worse. And the way I'm seeing this is that if you want to have any kind of relationship moving forward with your wife, I mean, you don't really have much room to talk. You better repent. And the second thing that really stood out to me in this counseling was when he came to me crying, and he says, "I want to thank you." And I mean, these were tears of joy. He says, "You never once downplayed my sin, but told me the truth." People want to talk about mercy, and when you're talking about somebody who's underage, people might go and say, "You said this kid, if he doesn't turn from his ways, if he doesn't repent, he becomes public enemy number one." And a lot of people kind of get defensive. What about the love of Jesus? Well, one thing we must not forget about the love of Jesus is that Jesus' love is bookend by his holiness. It's surrounded by his holiness, but part of his love is his justice. And if people refuse to accept what Jesus has done, if they refuse to apply the blood of Christ to their life, they are guilty, and we're not being loving.
Right.
If we leave out justice.
Well, and that goes...
And everybody's talking justice today. I think that we would be able to understand that, but we can't, it seems.
But it also goes to the idea of, everybody wants to get stuck on this idea of, well, you're not being loving towards that person. I'm being loving towards my daughter. Well, because I'm protecting the victim.
And on top of that, enabling sin is not loving.
It's not loving, because when you enable sin, all you do is you empower that person to go out and hurt somebody else. And I'm sorry, but that's not loving. If I empower a brothel owner to go out and capture more girls, I'm not being loving to the girls that he's capturing. So this idea that I have to have all this mercy for the bad guy and not even consider what will happen to future victims is absolutely ludicrous. It's stupid. It's brain dead. It's dumb. I don't have harsh enough words for it. It's just ludicrous. You have to confront sin, and you have to confront wickedness, and you have to tell people the way you're living is going to send you to hell. I'm going down the road. I see the bridge. I mean, you guys have a great example of it right over here. On this, I don't even know what it is, over here in between Cedar Rapids and Iowa City. There's that one lake there's a lake over there. It's on the east side of I-380.
And I'm going brain dead here as to what the name of that lake is, but that's okay.
I don't know what lake it is, but if you look at it, there's the big main body of waterway, and then over here there's another little body of waterway, but there's a, like, somebody built at one point a walkway or a path going across the lake, and there must have been a bridge, apparently, the way I look at it, because the water line goes up and down on this lake depending on how much rain we've had and stuff, and right now
we haven't had much.
Yeah, and right now it's down quite a ways, and so it looks like there was a metal bridge in there at one point, but the metal bridge is sitting down like this, and it dives down into the water, and then so the cement path comes over, it drops down into the water, and it comes back over, and it goes on. But then it eventually goes back down into the water again, and so if somebody's cycling along there at night, and I don't tell them that, hey, stupid, the bridge is out, they're gonna get hurt. They're gonna run into something. They're gonna fall into the water. They're gonna hit their head and drown, on the metal bridge or with the remnants of it or whatever. And so if I don't tell somebody that the bridge is out, I'm not being loving to them. Well, it's the same thing with confronting sin. If I don't confront sin and tell people, hey, the way you're living, the bridge is out. And this is the thing that, as I said, my mercy will extend to the point that I want you to get help. I want this to be confronted with this young man. And we sat down and we gave both of his parents copies of the letters. And we said, this is what's going on. Here's the evidence. This is your son's handwriting. This was written to our 11-year-old daughter. She has not read the second one. She has read the first one. The first one asked questions that should only be asked between a husband and wife in the marriage bed. And talking about fantasies and so on and so forth. And so I'm extending mercy to him in that I want him to get help, but I'm also extending justice in that he needs to be confronted with this so he can be repentant. And I've also talked to the authorities that are able to pull him from different activities and are able to counsel him and to instruct him and to come alongside the parents and help them too. But as I said, if this isn't dealt with, this will lead him down a very wrong slope very quickly, and it's a very slippery slope. And I will guarantee, based on other conversations that I've had, I will guarantee that he has gotten into pornography, and I'll guarantee it's probably been within the last year and a half, 2 years.
Well, and this is important because I think a lot of people do understand maybe that we shouldn't have mercy to pedophiles and to people who are in these sex slave rings kind of a thing. But then they sit out there and they don't apply those same principles that they apply to the worst down to the smaller things. And so they start enabling sins. Maybe it's a grandson, maybe it's a child, maybe it's a maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a spouse. I don't know what it is. But people have these different relationships, and they want to enable sin. And then people who want to confront sin, they go and they say, you're not being loving. Now, hold on here. The same principles that we apply to sex slavery when it comes to dealing with sin is the exact same principles we must apply to little white lies or whatever it might be. Because sin is sin. Now, that doesn't mean that doesn't mean all sins are created equal. Because Jesus told Pilate, the person who delivered him had the greater sin. So there are different levels of sin, but the reality of it is that the same antidote is the same antidote. And people, deal with all kinds of stuff. Oh, you've got some friends who are having, who are shacking up and they're having children out of wedlock. And oh, I can't believe you would tell them that that's wrong or be against them, or these homosexuals that are same-sex attracted. And love is love. Oh, all this kind. You got to be more loving. You got to be kind. You got to be gentler. You got to be. No. You're enabling sin.
You are.
And that's a major issue. You cannot love someone and enable their sin at the same time. And we've lost sight of that, not just in America as a whole. We expect the world to love sin and to love that. But within the churches of America, we've lost that. But sorry, that's just a little bit of a...
But this goes back to something that I was thinking about while I've been on the road this week. And really, I look at what's going on in different communities in our nation. I look at the destruction that's going on. We look at Antifa, we look at BLM, we look at all these different groups. And really what we're looking at is we're looking at the results of somebody asked, and I think this is what spawned the question. What spawned the thought rather. Somebody asked the question, can a single mother raise a son to be a man? And my answer was, many have tried, most have failed.
I think that's a fair answer, because as you're asking that, I'm sitting here going, how do you answer that question without enabling brokenness? And also because there are some single mothers out there that it's not of their own fault.
Right. We have a young lady at church that's a single mother of 3.
About. Yep.
And her husband was broadsided at the day before Christmas, and it was a tragic accident, and he's dead and gone. And
you know how I would add to this answer. Not only can a single mother raise a young man or a boy to become a man, not without the help of a church.
Exactly.
And you got to have a strong. I think you'd have to have a strong pastor. Really.
Right. And that's the thing. I went on in this answer and I said, and those that won't admit they have failed, it's the reason they won't admit they've failed is because their feminism won't allow them to, because we have this culture that says that I am woman, hear me roar. We had the Nara Lee commercials. You're way too young for this commercial, but she can bring home the bacon, she can fry it up in a pan was the song, and it was all this feminist of the 70s, very feminist.
It is so interesting that you're bringing this up, because this topic came up 2 or 3 times yesterday with feminism. And it's come up actually several times this week now that I think about it. This is something I thought about, okay? I just want to get your thought on this. We have a certain demographic of people, leftists, that would like to say that gender is fluid. It is a spectrum, okay? But then they would also like to say we need to have equality of genders. Mm-hmm. And I pointed this out to my wife yesterday. I said, just thought of the day. I said, okay, so you've got this group that believes in fluidity of genders. They want equality of genders. I said, it's impossible, because any disparity in one way, one day, might end up being a disparity and change completely the opposite the next day, because everybody changed their gender. Mm-hmm. I said they're trying to regulate something that they're claiming is fluid, which is impossible to do. Mm-hmm. It's if it's always on a spectrum and always ever changing.
Yeah,
and it's not static.
It's the target is always moving.
Right. So they're seeking an equality while simply stating that you don't have to be the gender that you are born biologically, and you can choose whatever you are. It's this absolute lunacy that they're bringing out, and the problem is that we're not created equal in function. Pastor Carey goes over this quite a bit, I believe, in Beyond the Walls series that he did, and he preached that. So in church, and so you heard this when he talks about him and Molly, right? Mm-hmm. And he says, functionally, they are not created equal. He cannot bear a child.
Right, and she can't open a pickle jar.
Exactly.
She can't. I love Molly, but Pastor Carey has to rescue her quite often from the pickle jars, I think. but it really comes down to, we have a whole nation of fatherlessness, and we have that whole nation of fatherlessness because if you go back far enough, what we've done, we have allowed over the years, that's just a little sin. It's not that big of a deal. And we have enabled the little foxes that spoil the vines. We've enabled them to come into the garden. And they're the things that the little foxes are the ones that cause the damage, because eventually they'll do more damage and more damage and more damage and more damage. And next thing you know, the vine is ruined. And the vine of America has allowed these little foxes for so long to creep in and creep in and creep in and creep in. And you look at our politicians, and so often they want to, well, that's awful, and you shouldn't be doing that, and that's awful, and that guy's a bad guy because of this and that and the other thing.
Thank you, Joe Biden.
That's what I was thinking. And but then they don't want to look at their own hair sniffing and their own, creepiness. And I'm picking on Joe a little bit, but don't
worry, we don't have to call him picking on Trump either.
Yeah, I bash on Trump just as much. But the bottom line is that we have allowed. We always want to look at the other guy and say how awful the other guy is, but then we allow our own, and then when it comes home and now my and I'm making a general. I'm not talking about my own family here in this scenario, but somebody comes home and they find out that their kid's homosexual or is into pornography or whatever, and all of a sudden they start making excuses for it. Mm-hmm. And we start allowing it, and then, but what does that do? It just causes us to go down this slippery slope, and the only way for America to restore it is to, this is the law, this is the end. We have to have something concrete, and right there in the Ten Commandments, we have something concrete. Right. This says, look, don't cover your neighbor's stuff. Thou shalt not lie. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not murder. If we would just obey those,
we'd be doing pretty good. But the first 4 commandments, you look at, have no other gods before me, don't make graven images, Completely blanking here. Remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. Don't take the Lord's name in vain. There we go. Lord's name in vain is the third one there. But nonetheless, is it a surprise? Because if you take those four things, it's all about remembering and respecting and honoring your Heavenly Father. Is it any surprise in our society that since we have been absent towards our Heavenly Father, that we would have our earthly fathers absent towards us? And I'm not talking every single earthly father. I mean, I love my dad. He is a tremendous dad. But as a society, we have a lot of fatherlessness, not just in single mothers, but also in fathers that are in the home, but they choose not to father. They are not leading their family. They're not leading their wives. They're not leading their children. And then we have a bunch of broken homes that are, on their second, third marriages, and it makes it impossible to be not impossible, but it makes it incredibly difficult, maybe impossible, to be a true father because you've got all this other baggage, and it's always the idea of you're competing against whether or not they say, oh, we're a team and we parent together just separate and all this kind of other stuff. Let me just tell you here, look, strong cup of coffee here. That's garbage, okay? Yes. It's garbage. You're always competing for the affections of your children, and you are fighting the spouse because you're either on the same team in unity or you're on opposite teams. It doesn't matter. Right. It doesn't matter how much you might respect the other person or say you respect the other person. When it is something that God put together that has now been separated, you are on opposite teams. It is a broken relationship. I talk to people weekly who deal with this kind of stuff because it's so prevalent in our nation. But the reality of it is that we need even the fathers in the home that are there to actually step up and be fathers, because when we have that broken spiritual relationship as a nation, there's no doubt we're also going to have broken earthly relationships, horizontal relationships, because our horizontal relationships reflect our heavenly one, right, our vertical one,
right. And this brings up an interesting topic of conversation because I was talking to a friend of mine last night that my wife and I know this lady that she's 38 or 39, and she was happily married. Her husband died of cancer, if I'm not mistaken. It was cancer, and so she has 5 beautiful kids that are absolutely just wonderful, wonderful kids. And I have a friend of mine that has never been married, and is a single guy, and is 45, and so we're encouraging him to get to know this widow and her
take
family.
Take your Cupid's arrow out.
Yeah, and one of the things that he brought up was, okay, so he goes, I really don't have any idea how this works. How do I, if we moved into a relationship, what's that going to look like? Because these kids I'm not their dad. And stuff, and I said, it's going to be a challenge a little bit, but at the same time, because you love God and you're seeking Him, and because they love God and the kids are seeking God, and their mother has been really instrumental in keeping them on the right path, and through influences of the people at church, and they're really active in their church and stuff, and because they have the Bible as their foundation, it's going to be a lot easier than if this was a second and third marriage, because then the kids are very definitely going to go, well, you're not my dad, and they're going to pit the stepdad against the real dad all the time, and it becomes a game of plays, basically. Yep. And so when we destroy the fatherhood, we destroy the family.
Yeah. Children through sin nature, they have a really good understanding of the tactic of divide and conquer, don't they? Even if there hasn't been divorce divisions, okay? Right. You have the children who come up and they ask mom or dad first, and mom or dad says no, and so what do?
They go to the other parent.
They go to the other parent. And if you weren't on the same page before, or if you don't do your investigation, you might get in trouble. And I mean, we can see this already, this kind of nature, in our 20-month-old, which is insane to think about. He's about 21 months, I guess, now, or will be in a week. But it's funny. I look at this little guy, Thomas, and he's just the cutest little guy. And I mean, you can tell it's kind of when he wants something, he kind of already knows which parent to go to who's the softie. So he always comes to me. And no, but it is amazing to see that. But should we look at when our nation was seeking God?
Yeah. Well, I do want to. I want to give you a little point on handling that, though. I do. So I have.
You've got a little experience.
I have 6 kids, so I've seen this game played many times. So my response is, "Well, did you ask your mom?" Yeah. What'd she say? Okay, and then I get the answer, or I'll just look at them and go, "I don't know. Go ask your mother."
Now, I learned pretty quick as a child because I tried this. I remember doing this one time. Actually, I don't even remember if I did it. I might have just seen my cousin do this. He lived with us for a little bit, but nonetheless, I remember either it was me or my cousin, like I said, they're going and asking my mom, getting told no, and then going and asking my dad. My dad found out about it, and he goes, well, he did the same thing. Did you ask your mom? And yeah. Well, and now that you're coming and asking me, you're in trouble. It doesn't even matter what the answer is or what my answer would have been, because you thought that we weren't going to be on the same page, and that's wrong of you, and you didn't accept the answer and get in trouble that way.
Yep. Yep. So
should we open up?
Yep.
Yeah. It's funny. We were talking about, hey, what all do we want to talk about? I said, well, we'll just wing it like normal. And I mean, look at that. Look at that conversation right there.
Yeah. It's always funny how it works.
Yeah. So we're picking up in Exodus chapter 13 from the Founders Bible, which is just an absolute wonderful resource. You should definitely get one of these. We're looking at remembering our national birthday. And so this is going to be interesting to look at. But it says, it's funny because we're in Exodus 13 and it starts off in Genesis 12. I thought that's an interesting way to start off Exodus 13. But in Genesis 12, God promised Abraham that he would make a nation from Abraham's descendants. It took hundreds of years, but that promise finally came to pass when God raised up Moses to bring them out of bondage in Egypt. It required 10 plagues before an oppressive Pharaoh let the people go. Even after that, they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years before finally entering the land, where they actually became established as an independent nation. But the turning point for the independence of the Jews was a decisive moment in their establishment as a nation. It was the Passover, when God, in a miraculous demonstration of power, struck down the firstborn of the Egyptians. Out of all the amazing things along Israel's lengthy road to becoming an independent nation and people, God commanded them to remember that one particular event, to celebrate the anniversary of one particular day every year thereafter, in Exodus 13:10. And not only were they to honor that day, but they were also to use it to teach the rising generations about what God had done in birthing their nation. The Passover is interesting here, right? Right now I'm in a sermon series and it's titled Revival and National Security. I thought that'd be pretty appropriate for today's day and age. But we're looking at Ezra and Nehemiah, and we actually went a little bit further out and looked at a couple of minor prophets that were contemporaries at that time, Zechariah and Haggai. But in 2 weeks here, we're going to go over the reinstitution of the Passover, and it's a major deal. And it's interesting because the Passover is kind of reflected in communion. In fact, communion was during the Passover meal. It was the Last Supper, and it's a specific part of it. And I've never done this. You've done Passover Seders before, but this next year I'm really looking forward to doing a Passover Seder. I already had a friend. You might have invited me too to one, because I think you're. Maybe I don't remember, but I've had at least Pastor Christian down in Cedar Rapids invited me to go to one. So I'm looking forward to it. First of all, it's food, so I'm always excited for that. But
and it's lamb.
And it's lamb. I really like lamb.
Yeah, just saying.
And if I ever were to raise a lamb, I would name it Lamb Chops.
You would have to.
Yeah, to talk about what it is going to become. Yeah. But can you tell us just a little bit about, since you've done one of these Seders before, tell us maybe just a couple of things about Passover?
So you have the bitter herbs, you have the wine, you have the lamb, you have the hyssop, and if I remember right, and it's been several years, so if I get this wrong, please forgive me. And I'm tired.
You act like you've driven 1,200 miles.
Yeah, but yeah, we'll have 34 by the time I'm home. I can't even say I'm halfway done yet. So, but anyway, so I think they dip the hyssop and they sprinkle it as a sign. They dip it in the salt water, if I remember right, and they sprinkle it as a sign of the shedding of the blood on the doorpost, the sprinkling of the blood on the doorpost. You have the horseradish, and so you have the horseradish in its bitterness represents the bitterness of our sin and stuff. I'm not sure what that says about me because I like horseradish, but
me too. I
but you have the lamb, and they would always take the lamb in the actual true Passover. They would take the lamb and they would basically bring this yearling lamb into, maybe not necessarily into the house, but like right next to the house, and they would get the kids good and attached to it, and then for like a week, and then they would slit its throat. And they would do that because they needed the kids to see
that there's a value,
that something has to die for you to live. And so many people, this is why I look at so much disconnection between agriculture and the modern American family today. And I don't remember where it was on Facebook, but I had seen this highly intelligent individual. She's like, I don't understand why all these farmers have to plant all these crops. Don't they know they can just go to Kroger's and Myers? I'm not sure where you think your food comes from, but the grocery store doesn't have a magic machine like the Jetsons in the back that just makes your food magically for you. But when we have such a disconnect of ourselves from the farm and from agriculture, and that's what God was trying to get the Jews to do here. He wanted them to be so connected.
Well, it's interesting too, because God created man, and where did he put man?
In the garden.
In a garden.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I can grow weeds really well. That's about the only thing I know how to grow.
Kind of looks like my garden this year.
Well, I've seen some of the fruit of your garden. You're doing okay.
Yeah, I'm doing okay, but you got to dig through all the weeds to find it.
But there really is so much spiritual correlation. And the thing that in the last few years God has really been showing me is in being in evangelicalism, we often we have wholesale rejected Catholicism in a sense, and understandably so. I'm not a apologist for Catholicism, but one of the things that we've cut off, we've overcorrected, we've gone in the other ditch. We've cut off monuments, memorials, things like that, visual representation. And yet God had several times a visual representation. Now, I'm not saying go get a little shrine and worship a saint or Mary or anything. No. That's not what I'm talking about. But I mean, he had Israel when they crossed over into the Promised Land, which we're kind of talking about a little bit with this. They raised 12 stones. He said, put this out here. So when your children go by, they ask, what are those stones? Well, let me tell you, son. These represent when we crossed over into the Promised Land. Let me tell you what we went through. And I could preach for 3 hours on this.
But going back to the Passover Seder. So the Passover Seder, there is there's 3 matzahs, and the matzahs are these crackers that are about this big. And the Jews have made these for thousands of years. This is not a new deal. This is thousands of years before Christ came. And they were making these same pieces of bread, and they were piercing them, and they were baking them. They were unleavened, so they didn't have any sin in them.
Leaven stands for sin. Yeah.
And so they were unleavened bread, and they would pierce them through. And then what they would do is they would take these matzahs, and they would take 3 of them, and they would take the center one out of the. They put them in this bag, and they would take the center one out of the bag, if I remember right. And they would take it and they would break it. And then the father would hide, I don't remember if it was part of it or all of it, but he would wrap it in a napkin and he would go hide it. And then the kids had to go find it. And then when they found it, whichever one found it came back and demanded a ransom for this matzah.
So a broken body,
right,
that was pierced and striped. Was
hidden. They're in perfect stripes down through the whole thing, and it's all these piercings.
Was hidden, and was brought back up, and was sold for a price of silver, no less.
Yeah, and
does that point to anything? I mean, does that remind you of anything at all?
Yeah, and the Passover Seder. That's why I love doing it, because it is such a picture. And we actually, the first time that we did it, we actually bought 2 lambs and we actually butchered them, and it's amazing. You know, I'm a farm kid, and you have your keep calm and eat bacon sign in your window here.
Yeah.
And which I'm liking that. I have no problem walking up to a pig and just going, I really don't. It doesn't bother me in the least unless I miss. I hate injuring an animal. But I had a very hard time.
Injuring an animal and wasting around.
Yeah, and wasting around. But I had a very hard time shooting these lambs. I had a very difficult time. It was hard.
Well, it's a little different when they're not full grown. Yeah, you know, I mean, when they're...
Well, these were full grown. I mean, these were ewe lambs, and they weren't yearlings, but they were full grown ewe lambs,
But they still had kind of that baby lamb.
Yeah,
kind
they're cute. I mean, even in a year or year and a half or 2 years, they're still cute.
But it's not Billy. And I know goat and lambs are different here.
Right.
I get that, but it's not Billy Goat Gruff. You know,
right.
Out there. I mean, it's not this. You know.
No, believe me, I wouldn't have had a problem shooting my ram goat. He was obnoxious. If there was any animal that deserved to die, it was him. Only second to my pigs. But these lambs, there is something intrinsically innocent and pure and sweet about a lamb that God does. He created it as a picture of Christ. And you can't be around lambs and not kind of fall in love with them. You know, and so there's something really powerful about the Passover Seder when you reconnect to the bloodshed and the ugliness of what we do to this lamb, and then you realize that's what I did to Christ. And there's something just beautifully powerful about that you can't connect to on other levels that I think you miss so much. So.
Well, should we continue reading? Because there's actually just a little bit time left and a little bit of a page. It's about perfect.
Right.
Almost like we planned this out. We didn't. So it says, the founding father, Elias Boudinot, saw a correlation. Man, I went completely dyslexic there. Saw and was. I read that backwards. That was weird. But anyway, Boudinot saw a correlation between the account in Exodus 13 and the American experience. As with Israel, much occurred in the many years leading up to the following American independence, but our turning point was a specific event. The approval of the Declaration of Independence on July 4th in a famous speech in 1798, Boudinot expounded on the significant parallels between Israel and what happened with America 4,000 years later. And he said this: the deliverance of the children of Israel from a state of bondage to an unreasonable tyrant was perpetuated by the Paschal, or the Passover lamb. and enjoining it on the posterity as an annual festival forever, with a remember this day in which ye came out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Exodus 13:3. Let us then, my friends and fellow citizens, unite all the endeavors this day to remember with reverential gratitude to our supreme benefactor all the wonderful things that he has done for us in our miraculous deliverance from a second Egypt, another house of bondage. And thou shalt show thy son this day, saying, this day is kept as a day of joy and gladness, because of the great things the Lord hath done for us, when we were delivered from the threatening power of an invading foe. And it shall be a sign unto thee upon thine hand, for a memorial between thine eye, and the law of the Lord may be in thy mouth. For with a strong hand thou hast been delivered from thine enemies. Thou shalt therefore keep this ordinance in its season from year to year forever. Exodus 13:8-10. The 4th of July is an annual day of celebration and remembrance, like that in Exodus 13, one of many American practices with biblical precedents. You know, I'm just going to say, first of all, I got my text for July 4th next year for preaching. That's an incredible parallel right there. And I'm trying to remember Elias Budnot, if he was, I'm going to have to look up afterwards, but I think he was a pastor. I'm not sure. I can't remember if Elias Budnot was a pastor or if he just happened to be part of Continental Congress. Do you remember off the top of your head?
I think he might have been a pastor, but I'm not.
We'll find out here.
Yeah.
What we don't know, Google does. Yeah. But I've got a book literally sitting 20 feet away from me, and I'm going, if I grab that book, I know right where to look to find this out. I hate it when that happens.
Yeah.
But we'll give you an update on that afterwards. But any kind of closing thoughts on all that we've gone over today?
Encourage your friends and family to dig into their families and dig into the Word of God. And one of the things that I said to this father that I was talking about earlier, the one whose son we had to confront, and I said to him, I said, you know what? I said, your sons, your boys will watch you and they will respond. Depending on how you dig into the Word and how you get into your fellowship with God, is how they're going to follow your example. And so when the fathers of our nation begin to understand the gravity and the seriousness of their job, and they begin to teach and instruct and disciple their children in the ways that they should go, then their children will respond. Will all of them? No, if you raise an 18-year-old and they're rebellious and headstrong because you've been rebellious and headstrong, yeah, you might be too late. That does happen, and it is the case in some areas and stuff. But if your children are young enough, you have the ability of making a course correction and changing, and really being able to be the leader and the head and the father of your household. And even as you age, and even as your children age, if they see a radical transformation in you, you were talking about the guy that's in prison and stuff, and actually, I don't think we're very far from, is the state prison over in Jefferson or Zyra?
I'm not sure.
Wherever the state prison is, we have a guy that
I haven't been put in it near as many times as you have.
No, I haven't ever been there either. That's why I don't know where it's at. But there was a guy that when I was growing up, he was a biker. He wasn't a part of the 1% gang or one of the outlaw motorcycle clubs or anything, I don't think. But he definitely ran around in the same vein.
He was a rough rider.
He was very rough, and my understanding is that there was some pedophilia charges against him, against some of his kids, some of his daughters, but or stepdaughters, whatever the case was, and he was. we were out shelling corn one day. So I'm old enough that we were still shelling corn. We had here in Iowa, we would harvest our corn on the ear, not like they do today where they run it through a combine. We actually had a corn picker, and it would harvest the ears of corn, and then we put the ears of corn in a wire bin, and they would dry over the winter time, or the fall rather. And then we would hire a sheller, and he would come in with a piece of equipment, and we'd unload the bin, and we'd put it through the sheller, and then we'd end up with cobs, and we'd end up with the grain. And anyway, we were over shelling the next spring or next summer at a family's house, and this guy was working there with us that day, and I'm standing back here, I'm 18 years old and whatever, and so I've got this really long metal pole that I'm going up in, and I'm jabbing the corn from the outside, and he's right below me, and I pull out too far, and it comes down and hits him. Ooh. I thought I was a dead man. And no joke, I thought he was gonna come uncorked and hurt me, seriously. And anyway, he ended up going to prison for, like I said, I think it was sexual abuse charges against him, and he got saved in prison. And pretty much all of his kids have, they're coming around. Most of them are walking with the Lord, but they've been able to see that change in him. Mm-hmm. So it is possible for fathers to change and to help their children change, even if they're out of the house, even if they're
well, and a lot of people say, but it's too late. Mm-hmm. Well, let me say this: change today, because tomorrow's even later.
Exactly.
I mean, you can't change yesterday.
Right.
And tomorrow's even later than today. So if you're starting to think it's too late, that's all the more reason to change. Mm-hmm. So that you can do the best that you can do moving forward.
And it very well could be. Mm-hmm. It could be. Mm-hmm. But if you use that it could be as your excuse to never change, then it will always be too late, and it never will change. But if you decide to make a change and you go after that change, regardless of the consequence, regardless of the outcome of your change, in other words, regardless of whether your kids see your repentance and whether your kids accept it and follow suit, you leave the results up to God. You mm-hmm. go after him, and you push in, and you follow him, and you seek him, and you seek his voice, and you Amen. Dig in, and you keep pushing, and you keep pushing, and you keep pushing. Not to the point that you're, so heavily minded you're no earthly good. Well, you have to understand that you're going to have to approach your children in such a way that you win them by your good conduct and your gentleness and your kindness. Doesn't mean you don't confront sin, but there's a way to do it when you've got that broken relationship. You mm-hmm. have to be a little more gentle. You can't be as firm, because they're just going to push you away. You're going to push them away, and they're going to push you away.
And what I found with people like that is that when they are absolutely violent and reckless towards the sin in their own life, in a good way, in the mm-hmm. sense that they're mortifying the flesh in their own life,
right?
They don't even hardly need to confront sin in somebody else's life,
right? Because
people will see you are so broken about your own sin, mm-hmm. like those people that you had those broken relationships with, and through that gentleness,
mm-hmm. yeah, exactly.
That's where it works.
Yeah, and I've seen it so many times where I see fathers sometimes that they get so broken over their own that then they turn around and they are harsh to their children that they've already damaged,
and they never deal with their own sin.
Well, no, I'm talking about the fathers that have dealt with their own sin.
They have, yeah.
They've dealt with their own sin, but they see how ugly their sin is. Mm-hmm. But then they go to the opposite extreme, and then they become not only harsh on themselves, but then they become harsh on the family members that they've already broken.
And only correcting and never teaching.
Right, and mm-hmm. so so the kids were young. Dad was an alcoholic, and he was abusive, and he was whatever. Mm-hmm. And Dad becomes a Christian, but he becomes, hard on himself, but then he turns around and is hard on them. Mm-hmm. Well, they're already broken, because he's already done the damage over here. And so if he now is, yes, he has a good heart. Yes, he's wanting to do right. Yes, he's passionately on fire for God. But if he comes over here and starts trying to demand them to meet up to his standards, he needs to be hard on himself and allow his good works to exemplify in front of them, not demand that they come up, because they're already damaged by him, and he's the damager. So there has to be more of a...
And there needs to be that teaching that come alongside, because a lot of times it's just now the demand and never the teaching, and it takes both verbal teaching and physically correcting.
Well, in an example. By an example. And, when I have times where I've screwed up with the kids or something, I come back to them and say, you know what, I screwed up here, and I'm sorry. And then so there can be that restoration quickly, because I haven't done a huge amount of damage. But in fathers where they've done a huge amount of damage, it's going to take that repentance. It's going to take that I'm sorry. But then it's going to take time, and it's going to have the healing balm of Gilead, so to speak, to heal the child's heart. And it's going to be wrought in prayer. It's going to be wrought in going after that and stuff. So I know we're probably close on time. I don't know how long we're at.
We're a little over, but that's okay.
But anyway, this was some things I feel like we needed to address and deal with and stuff. So if you haven't had the chance to stop by teshuatea.com, it's TESHUAHTEA.com or deliverancetea.com. Stop by, check out some of the products made by the girls. 50% of the profits and 100% of the donations go back to the rescue facility, as well as
you directly buy these products from the girls.
Yeah.
So the girls have already gotten paid, and then plus 50% of what's made off of them getting sold goes back to the girls too.
Right.
Those girls are double dipping in the blessings. What a wonderful thing.
Yeah, exactly. So again, teshuatea.com or deliverancetea.com. Thank you very much for joining us. Please like and subscribe and share. As always, I appreciate it. Have a blessed day. You've been listening to the Liberty Unveiled podcast, setting captives free one episode at a time. The Liberty Unveiled podcast is a part of the Unresolved Podcast Network and has been brought to you by Teshua Tea Company, TESHUAHTEA.com or deliverancetea.com.